The old-timers in Copper Ridge like to say some stories were too crazy to be true. Dylan Cross used to agree with them, right up until the morning he found the horse chained to the tree. Late October had wrapped the Whitmore ranch in cold and silence. Mist clung to the hills like a gray blanket, and the frost bit straight through Dylan's worn denim jacket as he walked the fence line with his grandfather's old toolbox in hand. At 38, Dylan moved with the slow precision of a man who'd already made his share of bad decisions and couldn't afford any new ones. His hands were scarred from wire and wood. The lines around his eyes came from long nights staring at bills and old regrets. The Whitmore place wasn't much. Tired fences, thin grass, more weeds than decent pasture. But for a man with nowhere else to go and a past he wouldn't talk about, it was still a miracle. A bunk, steady work, and a quiet corner of Montana where no one asked too many questions. He was halfway through checking the back line when he heard it. At first it sounded like wind groaning through the trees. Then he stopped, held his breath, and realized this wasn't wind. It was breathing, heavy, strained, something big and hurting. He followed the sound into the trees, boots crunching through frozen leaves. The further he went, the louder it got, dragging breaths, a faint clink of metal against wood. Dylan pushed through a tangle of brush and stepped into a small clearing dominated by an ancient oak. And froze. Collapsed at the base of the tree was the biggest horse he'd ever seen, easily 18 hands, coat so black it swallowed the weak morning light. But it wasn't the size that made his stomach turn. It was the chains, thick metal wrapped around the horse's neck and chest, bolted to the oak like something out of a medieval nightmare. The links had eaten into the skin, leaving raw, oozing wounds. Each shallow breath puffed a cloud of vapor in the cold air. Ribs showed like boards under that black hide. One huge hoof scraped weakly at the ground. Someone hadn't just abandoned this horse. They'd imprisoned him and walked away. Dylan spotted a scrap of paper tied to the chain at the horse's neck. He untied it with numb fingers and unfolded the note. His name is Goliath. I can't feed him anymore. He's too big, too wild, too much trouble. Maybe someone else can save him. I'm sorry. No name. Just those words blurred by water. Or tears. Dylan looked into the horse's eyes, a deep, burning amber. And what he saw there was not madness, not rage, but one raw question. Are you here to help me, or to leave me here to die? Dylan didn't own a horse. He barely afforded his own groceries. The sensible choice was obvious. Call the sheriff, let animal control handle it, let somebody in a uniform decide if the kindest thing was a needle. Instead, he heard himself say, quietly, firmly, "Easy, big guy. I don't know how yet, but I'm not leaving you like this." For the first time, one of Goliath's ears flicked toward him, and somewhere deep in Dylan's chest, something he thought was dead moved. Dylan forced himself to move. Up close, the situation looked even worse. The chains weren't just wrapped, they'd been pulled tight, biting deep into the flesh of Goliath's neck and chest. Rust mixed with blood. Every breath was a struggle. "Who did this to you?" Dylan muttered, anger rising like heat in his throat. He checked the lock. Thick, old, solid. No way it was coming off by hand. He jogged back to his cabin, grabbed everything that might help, bolt cutters, hacksaw, wire cutters, an old pry bar, and hurried back, heart pounding harder with every step, terrified the horse would be dead by the time he returned. Goliath was still there, still breathing. Barely. "Okay, big guy," Dylan said, dropping to his knees beside the chains. "You and me, let's see what we can do." The work was slow and brutal. Metal groaned, tools slipped, his hands stung from cold and effort. Every time the chains shifted, Goliath flinched and tried to move, but Dylan kept talking, voice low and steady. "Barn, hay, water, sun on your back. Just hang on. You're not done yet." Link by link, the prison loosened. Finally, with a last, grating snap, the final section of chain dropped to the ground. For a moment, Nothing happened. Goliath didn't bolt, didn't rear, didn't run. He just lay there, as if his body didn't quite believe what his skin was telling him. "You're free." "Come on, big guy," Dylan whispered. "Show me you want this." On the second try, with a sound that was half grunt, half roar from somewhere deep in his chest, Goliath heaved himself upright. He swayed, legs trembling, sides heaving. Any normal horse would have turned and vanished into the trees. Goliath didn't. He took one slow, deliberate step toward Dylan, then another, close enough that Dylan could feel the heat rolling off his battered body. Very carefully, Dylan reached up and laid a hand on that velvet black muzzle. Goliath didn't pull away. In that quiet, frozen clearing, something invisible clicked into place. "Come on, Goliath," Dylan said softly, throat tight. "Let's go home." The walk back should have taken 15 minutes. It took almost 2 hours. Goliath could manage maybe 20, 30 steps before his legs started shaking. Every few minutes he stopped, sides heaving, breath fogging like steam from an engine about to fail. "Easy," Dylan kept saying, staying beside him every step. "We're getting there. One more stretch." More than once, Dylan wondered if the horse would collapse for good, but every time Goliath faltered, he'd look at Dylan, those amber eyes steady, determined, and force himself forward again. By the time the ranch finally came into view, something in the horse changed. His head lifted, ears forward. As if the sight of an open barn and real shelter sparked some memory of safety he'd nearly lost. Inside the barn, Dylan scrambled to piece together a stall on the fly, patching broken boards, throwing down fresh straw, dragging over buckets for water. It wasn't pretty, but it was warm, it was dry, and for now, that was enough. Goliath stood in the aisle, watching Dylan work as if memorizing every move. No fear, no anger, just patience and a strange, quiet intelligence. When old Benjamin Whitmore returned from town and stopped in the doorway, he froze at the sight of the giant black horse. "Lord above," he murmured, stepping forward. "Where'd you find this one?" Dylan told him the whole story in a few short breaths. Benjamin ran a hand down Goliath's neck, eyes softening. "Son," he said quietly, "I've known horses my whole life. This one's special. You take care of him. He'll change things." Then his tone shifted, steady and practical. "But Dylan, caring for an animal like this, it won't be cheap. You sure you're ready for that?" Dylan looked at Goliath, ribs showing, wounds raw, but standing tall despite it all. "I'm sure," he said. It wasn't a smart decision, wasn't logical, wasn't affordable, but it was the first thing in a long time that felt right. And for the first time in years, Dylan felt something like purpose ignite in his chest. The first week was a battlefield. Dr. Patricia Vance showed up the next morning, took one look at Goliath, and whistled low. "He's alive because he's too stubborn to quit," she said, hands already moving over wounds and ribs. "But he's hanging by a thread. Malnourished, infected cuts, digestive system on edge, 1,000 ways this could go wrong. Small meals only," she warned. "Slow refeeding, careful hydration. And Dylan, don't get your hopes too high. Horses this far gone don't always make it back." But Goliath wasn't most horses. He accepted her treatments without fear, let her clean his wounds without so much as a flinch, stood still for injections, bandaging, examination. "He trusts you," Dr. Vance told Dylan, surprised. "That's rare." Dylan built a routine around survival, dawn feedings, slow walks to rebuild muscle, long grooming sessions in the afternoons. Goliath leaned into every moment, as if the touch itself stitched him back together. Sometimes Dylan talked while he worked, about nothing, weather, chores, childhood memories, the kind of thoughts he normally carried alone. Goliath listened, really listened. By the end of the week, the hollow spaces along his ribs weren't quite as sharp. His coat started to lose its dullness. The wounds were healing clean. And the first morning, Dylan walked out to the barn and heard a soft, low nicker greeting him. Quiet but unmistakably for him, he stopped in his tracks. "Well," he said, trying not to grin like a fool. "Look at you!" Goliath stepped forward, nosing at Dylan's jacket like an oversized dog demanding attention. A spark, a shift, a beginning. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a return to life for both of them. By mid-November, Goliath was a different horse, still thin, still healing, but the resignation was gone. In its place was a growing fire Dylan hadn't expected to see so soon. Every morning, Goliath waited at the stall door. Every afternoon, he followed Dylan around the pasture like a massive shadow. And every evening, he'd rest his head on Dylan's shoulder while being groomed, as if checking in. "We're still okay, right?" But the real change came one frosty morning. Dylan opened the gate, expecting Goliath to shuffle out slowly like usual. Instead, the horse took 3 eager steps, then broke into a smooth, powerful canter across the pasture. Not frantic, not panicked, joyful. Dylan froze, breath catching in his chest. This was the horse he'd been meant to be, strong, proud, magnificent. When Goliath finally trotted back, snorting clouds of steam, Dylan couldn't help laughing. "You scared the hell out of me," he said. Goliath bumped his shoulder gently, amused. Word about the big black horse spread fast in Copper Ridge. People slowed their trucks along the road just to catch a glimpse of him. Some came up the driveway asking if it was true. A chained horse, abandoned in the woods, now running like a legend reborn. Most just wanted to see him. But a few needed something more. The first was Lisa, an anxious 8-year-old who hadn't spoken much since her parents split. She hung back behind her mother, nervous, tiny, silent. Goliath saw her. He lifted his head, studied her carefully, then walked across the pasture with a slow, gentle certainty that made Dylan shiver. Lisa didn't run, didn't cry, didn't hide. She reached through the fence and touched his nose and whispered a single word. "Hi." Her mother gasped. Dylan swallowed hard. Goliath just stood there, breathing steady, patient as stone. It was the first sign, small but unmistakable, that this horse wasn't just healing. He was healing everyone around him. Lisa wasn't the last, not even close. Soon after her came Marcus Williams, the local troublemaker, 17, angry at everything, one bad choice away from real jail time. Dylan expected vandalism or attitude. Instead, Marcus showed up with his hands shoved in his pockets and asked quietly, "Got any work I can do for time with the horse?" Dylan handed him a pitchfork and expected him to quit in 10 minutes. He didn't. He mucked stalls until dark, came back the next day and the next. By week's end, the anger in his shoulders had eased. He started talking, started laughing. His teachers even called Benjamin to ask what miracle happened. Dylan didn't take credit. He knew exactly who'd done the heavy lifting. One night, Dylan found Marcus sitting in Goliath's stall, the giant horse's head resting gently in the boy's lap. Marcus whispered confessions, fear, guilt, things he'd never said out loud. Goliath didn't move, didn't judge. Just listened, and the boy cried into his mane. Word spread like wildfire. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years stood side by side at the fence. Parents brought kids who were hurting. Grown men came just to stand near the massive black horse and breathe easier for a moment. Dr. Vance noticed it too. "I've never seen an animal do this," she said during a checkup. "He should be traumatized. Instead, he's giving people something I can't even describe." Dylan looked at the horse, restored, steady, almost wise. "He's giving them what they need," Dylan said. But the truth was harder, deeper. Goliath was doing the same for him. For the first time in years, Dylan didn't feel like he was drifting. He felt anchored, useful, alive, And every time Goliath trotted toward him across the pasture, ears forward, trusting without hesitation, Dylan felt the same quiet realization settle deeper in his chest. This horse didn't just survive. He came here for a reason. Winter arrived fast in Copper Ridge, dragging snow and quiet with it. But inside the Whitmore barn, life felt warmer than it had in years. Every morning, Dylan found Goliath waiting at the gate, bright-eyed, massive, healed enough now to nudge him impatiently if breakfast was late. The great horse had gone from barely standing to greeting each day like he owned it, and people kept coming, families, teenagers, veterans, anyone who'd heard whispers about the black giant who somehow knew exactly what hurting people needed. One family arrived after their car slid off the road in a snowstorm. 2 shivering kids, exhausted and scared. When they stepped into the barn, Goliath lifted his head. The younger girl clung to her mother until Goliath walked forward and lowered himself onto his knees, shrinking his huge frame to her level. The child stepped closer and closer. Finally, she sat beside him in the straw, fingers buried in his mane, talking in tiny whispers. Her parents stood stunned, watching tension melt off her shoulders like ice in spring sunlight. When she left, she was smiling, a real smile, wide and bright. Her mother hugged Dylan, voice shaking. "Whatever this is, thank you. She hasn't been herself since the accident. Today is the first time she's come back to us." Dylan didn't know how to answer. He wasn't the healer here. He glanced at Goliath. The great horse looked back, calm, steady, ancient in a way that made no sense, as if to say, "This is what I'm here for." And Dylan knew, deep in his bones, that this wasn't luck or coincidence or small-town myth. Goliath was changing lives, every day, without trying. And Dylan felt the shift inside himself too, quiet, steady, undeniable. He was changing right along with him. By early spring, Goliath's impact was impossible to ignore. Copper Ridge had always been a quiet place. Too quiet, some said. But now, people flowed through the Whitmore Ranch like it was a crossroads of hope. A family from Denver came with their autistic son. He hadn't spoken a word in 8 years. He spent 3 hours with Goliath, sitting in the grass, stroking that enormous black neck, whispering things none of the adults could hear. And as they were leaving, just a few steps from the truck, the boy turned, looked directly at his parents and said, "Goliath is my friend." His mother collapsed into tears. His father grabbed Dylan like a lifeline. But Goliath? He just stood there, ears relaxed, as if this was exactly the outcome he'd planned. Another day, a veteran arrived. Haunted eyes, restless hands, the kind of hypervigilance that never shuts off. He barely made it through introductions before freezing up. Goliath saw him, walked up to the fence, and simply existed beside him. Calm, solid, unshakable. That night, the veteran slept 8 uninterrupted hours for the first time since coming home from deployment. Story after story, small miracles stacking up like falling snow. And Dylan felt himself shifting too. He wasn't the quiet ranch and hiding from his own past anymore. People came to him with questions, with hope, with their children. He found himself teaching, guiding, comforting, roles he'd never imagined having the right to fill. One busy Saturday, while showing a group how Goliath's exercise routine worked, Dylan caught his reflection in the barn window. He barely recognized the man looking back, straighter posture, brighter eyes. Calm he hadn't felt in years. Goliath wasn't just healing strangers. He was rebuilding Dylan Cross from the inside out. And for the first time in a very long time, Dylan wasn't afraid of the future. He was curious about it, ready for it. Because wherever this strange road was leading, knew he wasn't walking it alone. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was late May. Sun warm, grass high, the ranch buzzing with weekend visitors. A family drove in from the eastern plains with their 12-year-old son, Kevin, a bright kid with cerebral palsy who'd never walked without help. They weren't here for miracles, just a memory, a good day, something different. Kevin sat in his wheelchair near the pasture fence, watching Goliath with wide, curious eyes. Dylan expected the usual: gentle nudges, calm presence, quiet comfort. But Goliath, for the first time, did something deliberate, purposeful. He walked to the gate and stared at Dylan, waiting. Dylan opened it. Goliath went straight to Kevin. Then, slowly, carefully, he lowered himself onto the ground right beside the boy's chair. The message was unmistakable. Kevin understood it instantly. With trembling arms and sheer determination, he began transferring himself onto Goliath's broad back. His parents froze, terrified, but the horse didn't move a muscle. He stayed perfectly still, muscles locked, breathing slow. 15 long minutes later, Kevin was sitting tall on that enormous black horse. "Ready?" Dylan whispered. Goliath stood. Kevin let out a laugh so loud and pure it made the whole pasture stop and turn. For 20 minutes, Goliath walked the field, slow, steady, deliberate. Not a therapy horse by training, but one by instinct, by soul. Kevin's parents cried, visitors cried, even Dylan felt his chest break open. Because this wasn't just healing. This was flight. Freedom. A boy who had never walked, suddenly towering above the world on the back of a giant who'd once been left to die. When Goliath knelt again to let Kevin down, the boy wrapped both arms around his neck and whispered, "Thank you for letting me fly." And Dylan knew, right then and there, this horse wasn't just special. He was a calling, a direction, a purpose, one Dylan had never chosen, never imagined, but suddenly couldn't walk away from. The idea hit Dylan that night like a jolt he couldn't ignore. Watching Kevin ride Goliath, watching a boy who had never walked sit tall and fearless on the back of a horse once left to die, it forced Dylan to admit the truth he'd been avoiding. This wasn't just one miracle. It was a pattern, a calling forming itself right in front of him. And if he didn't act on it, he'd never forgive himself. After closing the barn and checking Goliath one last time, because he always did, Dylan headed toward the main house, rehearsing the speech in his mind. He found Benjamin Whitmore at the kitchen table, reading glasses perched low, a mug of coffee steaming beside a stack of feed invoices. Dylan didn't bother with small talk. He told him everything, what Goliath had done today, what he'd been doing for months, the changes in Lisa, in Marcus, in every single person who came to that pasture needing something they couldn't put into words. Then, he laid out the impossible part. A real program, a structured therapeutic ranch, trained volunteers, additional horses, new facilities, pathways, insurance, protocols. A place built around Goliath's gift instead of asking the ranch to absorb it. Benjamin didn't interrupt once. When Dylan finally stopped talking, more out of breath than he'd expected, the old rancher leaned back, folded his arms, and studied him with a look Dylan couldn't read. Then Benjamin smiled, not big, not dramatic, but with that quiet, proud warmth Dylan had only seen a handful of times. "Son," he said, "I've been waiting my whole life for someone to come along with a vision like this. Let's make it happen." It felt unreal, terrifying, electric. But as Dylan walked back to the barn that night, he saw Goliath waiting by the gate, watching him with those amber eyes that always seemed to know more than any animal should. And for the first time, Dylan didn't feel like he was stumbling blindly through life. He felt steady, directed, called. He scratched Goliath's jaw and whispered, "All right, big guy, looks like we're building something." Goliath pressed his huge head against Dylan's shoulder, breathing slow and warm, as if agreeing. And Dylan realized this wasn't just healing anymore. It was the beginning of a mission neither of them had asked for, but both were meant to carry. The ranch began changing faster than Dylan could keep up. One day, it was just him, Goliath, and a barn held together by stubborn nails. And the next, people from all over Copper Ridge were showing up with lumber, tools, and reasons of their own to help. News about the Black Giant spread like wildfire, and suddenly the Whitmore place felt less like a rundown ranch and more like the beginning of something real. A construction crew volunteered their time, saying Goliath had helped a family member through a panic disorder. Neighbors brought feed, fencing, used equipment, anything they could spare. Dylan wasn't used to people rallying around him, but now he found himself directing projects he hadn't even dreamed of months earlier. Through it all, Goliath watched the activity with calm curiosity, standing by the fence like the quiet supervisor of the whole operation. Kids would wander over to pet him. Adults stroked his neck with tired hands, and every time, Goliath shifted effortlessly into whatever they needed, steady, gentle, patient. It felt less like therapy and more like he was unlocking something in people that had been stuck for years. Their first official visitor was a military veteran who hadn't slept through a night since returning home. Dylan saw the tension in him instantly, the scanning eyes, the rigid stance. But Goliath approached slowly, lowering his head until the man finally reached out. The moment his hand touched that dark coat, something in him eased. Just eased. He leaned into Goliath, eyes closed, and let himself breathe for what looked like the first time in years. His daughter cried quietly the whole way back to the truck. "This is the calmest he's been since deployment," she whispered. That night, after everyone left, Dylan walked the property in the fading light. The new arena lights cast a soft glow over the pastures, and Goliath stood under them like a statue carved from midnight stone. Dylan leaned on the fence, tired but overwhelmed in the best possible way. "Look what you've started," he murmured. Goliath wandered over, nudged Dylan's shoulder with a warm, familiar heaviness. And in that moment, Dylan knew. Whatever this place was becoming, they were building it together. The turning point came in early spring, on a day that started like any other. Dylan was sweeping the barn aisle when a family from the Eastern Plains pulled up. Parents exhausted, their 12-year-old son Kevin watching the world from a wheelchair with bright, determined eyes. He had cerebral palsy, they explained. They weren't expecting miracles. They just wanted him to meet Goliath. From the moment Goliath spotted Kevin, something shifted. The great horse didn't approach with his usual gentle curiosity. He moved with purpose, stopping directly beside the boy as if he already knew why he was here. Kevin reached out, laughing when Goliath's warm breath tickled his hands, and the horse answered with a soft nicker that felt almost like a greeting. Then, Goliath did something Dylan had never seen before. He walked to the gate and lay down in the grass. At first, the parents panicked. "He'll crush him!" But Goliath stayed perfectly still, making himself small, patient, safe. Kevin understood before anyone else did. Slowly, with effort and trembling determination, he began moving from his wheelchair onto Goliath's broad back. It took forever, 15 minutes of careful shifting and deep breaths, but the horse didn't move a muscle. When Kevin was finally seated, Goliath rose with a smooth, powerful motion. Kevin gasped, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob, as he suddenly found himself tall, balanced, carried. His parents stood frozen, tears streaking down their faces as Goliath carried their son around the pasture in slow, steady circles. For 20 minutes, Kevin rode higher and freer than he'd ever known. "I'm flying," he whispered. "Mom, Dad, I'm actually flying." When Goliath lowered himself again and Kevin hugged his neck, the boy whispered, "Thank you for letting me be strong." That night, long after the family had left, Dylan stood in the arena replaying the moment. This wasn't just therapy. It wasn't luck. Goliath had made a choice. He'd seen what the boy needed and offered it without hesitation. Dylan looked out at the pasture, where the black giant grazed beneath the fading sky, and felt the truth settle deep in his chest. This horse wasn't just healing people. He was showing Dylan exactly what this ranch was meant to become. By the time summer crept into Copper Ridge, the ranch was no longer just a ranch. It was a destination. Cars came up the long gravel road almost every day now. Some visitors brought hope, others brought heartbreak, but all of them seemed to find something they didn't know they were looking for when they met Goliath. One afternoon, a young woman arrived with her husband, a combat veteran who hadn't slept more than an hour at a time since returning home. He stood stiff as a fence post, eyes darting, jaw clenched, every muscle braced for impact. Dylan recognized the look instantly, the kind of pain that comes from battles nobody sees. Goliath didn't rush him. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, lowering his head until his nose was level with the man's chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the veteran's shoulders loosened, barely perceptible at first, like the tiniest crack in an ice sheet. Goliath exhaled softly. The man exhaled too, a shaky, uneven breath. And then his hands hovered, uncertain, before finally resting on the horse's neck. His wife covered her mouth with both hands as tears streamed down her face. Not because something dramatic happened, but because something impossible did. The man was calm, really calm. For the first time in years. Afterward, he stood there in stunned silence. "I don't know what this is," he said quietly, "but I feel quiet, like my brain finally turned the volume down." His wife hugged Dylan, unable to speak. Moments like that became the new normal. Teenagers who had given up on themselves, parents drowning in grief, kids lost in their own minds. They all found their way to Goliath. And the more people he helped, the more obvious it became. This wasn't a phase or a fluke. This was purpose. Dylan felt it shifting in him too. He'd spent years drifting, trying to outrun the parts of himself he didn't want to face. But now, for the first time in as long as he could remember, he woke up with direction, with certainty, with something to lose, and something to build. One evening, as the sky burned orange above the pasture, Dylan stood at the fence watching Goliath graze. The big horse lifted his head, ears pricked, and walked over with that familiar, steady confidence. "Feels like you're running this place now," Dylan said with a tired smile. Goliath nudged him gently, warm breath rolling over Dylan's arm. And standing there, under that fading Montana sun, Dylan knew something simple and absolutely true. He hadn't just rescued Goliath. Goliath had rebuilt him, piece by piece. By late summer, the ranch felt almost unrecognizable. New fencing, a therapy arena, volunteers coming in shifts. Everything was changing fast. And yet the heart of it all remained the same. Every morning, before the first car pulled up the road, Goliath would be waiting at the gate, ears forward, as if reminding Dylan why they started this in the first place. One morning, the local physical therapist, Marlene Carter, came by unannounced. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, the kind who could intimidate a room just by raising an eyebrow. But even she softened when she watched Goliath working with a group of kids from the clinic, children with walkers, braces, tremors, anxieties, all of them drawn to the black giant like metal to a magnet. He moved differently around each one, slower, gentler, more patient, as if he adjusted the entire world to their pace. Marlene pulled Dylan aside afterward. "You realize this is bigger than you, right?" she said. Dylan shrugged. "Bigger than me, sure, but not bigger than us." She gave him a long look, the kind that said she saw more than he was admitting. "You don't give yourself enough credit, son. That horse heals people, but you're the one who built the place where healing can happen." He didn't know what to say to that, so he focused on chores, pretending the words didn't land exactly where he was most vulnerable. A week later, a group of troubled teens arrived. Kids who'd been kicked out of school programs, cycling through probation officers, angry at everything and everyone. Dylan expected resistance. He expected attitude. What he didn't expect was the silence that fell when Goliath stepped into the arena. The teens didn't mock him, didn't challenge him. They just watched. Something about Goliath's presence cut straight through their armor. Slowly, carefully, he approached them, choosing the angriest boy in the group, a kid named Tyler who stood with his arms crossed, jaw set tight. Goliath stretched his neck out and gently bumped Tyler's shoulder. The boy froze. Then, without warning, he broke, tears pouring down his face, shoulders shaking. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Goliath simply rested his head against the boy's chest until the storm passed. That moment changed the entire group. They worked harder, talked more, opened up in ways their counselors had been trying to achieve for months. When the teens left, their supervisor told Dylan, "Whatever you're doing here, keep doing it." That night, Dylan stood alone outside the barn, leaning against the fence while Goliath grazed quietly nearby. The air was warm, filled with the hum of crickets and the faint smell of alfalfa. It struck him suddenly how far they'd come, not just the ranch, but himself. There was a time he'd felt like the broken one, the lost one, but now people looked to him for guidance. Kids trusted him, families thanked him, the community depended on him, and all of it, every bit of it, had started with a starving horse chained to a tree. Goliath lifted his head, watching him with those amber eyes that always seemed to understand more than any animal should. Dylan stepped forward and rested his hand against the warm curve of the horse's neck. "We're not done," he whispered. "Not even close." Goliath exhaled softly, as if in agreement. 2 survivors, 2 second chances, and a purpose bigger than either of them ever imagined. Winter arrived early that year, brushing the mountains with white and turning the mornings sharp and silent. The ranch, once a forgotten speck on the edge of Copper Ridge, now felt alive in a way Dylan had never experienced, humming with purpose, community, and the quiet hope that people brought with them when they drove up that gravel road. One morning, as snowflakes drifted lazily across the pasture, Benjamin Whitmore joined Dylan by the fence. The old rancher leaned on the rails, studying the scene in front of them. Goliath standing still as a statue, while a little girl with selective mutism brushed his mane, whispering secrets only the horse could hear. "You built something good here," Benjamin said, voice low, meant only for Dylan. Dylan shook his head. "We did," Benjamin chuckled. "Son, you're the one folks come for. Goliath may heal them, but you're the one who keeps this place standing." Dylan didn't argue, but the words hit deeper than he expected. That afternoon, after the last session ended, Dylan walked Goliath out to the pasture. Snow was falling heavier now, quieting the world until it felt like the 2 of them were the only souls left in Montana. Goliath stopped at their usual spot, that worn patch of earth by the fence where everything had begun. Dylan placed a hand on the horse's warm neck. "5 years ago, I found you chained to a tree," he said softly. "But now I know. I wasn't the one who rescued you." Goliath turned his head, pressing gently into Dylan's chest, that familiar grounding gesture that felt more like language than instinct. "You saved me," Dylan whispered. "You gave me a reason to get up, a place to belong, a life I didn't think I deserved." The wind picked up, scattering snow through Goliath's dark mane. The horse lifted his head high, nostrils flaring as if claiming the cold air, the land, the sky, everything he had earned back. Behind them, the lights of the new therapy arena flickered on. In that glow, Dylan could see the footprints of dozens of people whose lives had changed here. Children, veterans, parents, strangers who had arrived broken and left a little more whole. All because of a horse someone once abandoned to die. Dylan leaned his forehead against Goliath's and let the moment settle. "We did good, boy, and we're just getting started." Goliath breathed out softly, warm, steady, certain. As dusk fell over the ranch, the two of them stood together in the snowfall, a man who had lost his way and the magnificent animal who had given him a second chance. Side by side, they watched the lights glowing across the fields of a place that didn't exist 5 years ago. A place built from pain, faith, and the quiet, miraculous resilience of a black horse with amber eyes. And in that stillness, Dylan understood. This wasn't the end of their story. It was simply the beginning of everything they were meant to do.